Hello, everybody. Thanks for staying to talk about federal money. So I'm Kathy Kuntz, and I'm with the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. That's Dane County, Wisconsin, the county that includes Madison. And to give you just a little bit of a sense, so we've had an Office of Energy and Climate Change for about 7 years now. Our office is responsible both for internal to county operations goals, where we achieved 100% renewable electricity offsets last year and will achieve carbon neutrality across our facilities, fleet, and land operations by 2030. And then, thank you. That piece feels that's all in our control. That's our internal stuff. And then on a countywide basis, our goals are to cut emissions in half by 2030 and be at carbon neutrality by 2050. For those of you who aren't from Wisconsin, the thing to know about that is counties in Wisconsin have essentially no regulatory authority. So I can't mandate people to reach that goal. All I can do is persuade them. And a big piece of the persuasion in the last couple of years is all of this federal funding. So this is my favorite graph of the federal funding from RMI because it really shows the scale of that funding. So I was with Wisconsin's statewide efficiency program, Focus on Energy, back in 2009 when President Obama did the Recovery Act, and we thought, that level of funding back then was unprecedented. But what we're talking about now is 3 to 4 times what we were talking about then. A really significant thing about the funding now is that about 2/3 of it, through the Inflation Reduction Act, is tax credits, which is not usually how the federal government allocates money. But it's a really important distinction, because tax credits are kind of magical. Okay? First, they're really simple. If you do a project that qualifies, you submit the paperwork and you get the credit. It's not competitive, there's a limit each year on who can do this or any of the kind of things that sometimes make programs really complicated. If you did something that qualifies, you get the credit. It's also predictable, and I think at this moment that's an important thing, that there is almost no historic tradition of Congress ever revoking a tax credit. It's just not politically popular, okay? So I can't guarantee what's going to happen in an election, but I can tell you that there's already a letter circulating in Congress where, something like 30 or 40 GOP congressmen have signed a letter saying, stop talking about touching the IRA tax credits, because we're not gonna. That suggests to me that these credits are pretty safe, okay? And they're in place under the IRA through 2032, which means you've got this predictability, you've got some time to plan things here. The other thing is they're expansive. So one of the things Congress did with the Inflation Reduction Act is they invented something entirely new. A problem with tax credits is you have to pay taxes to get them. So local governments, nonprofits, faith communities have historically not been able to get tax credits. Congress invented this thing they're calling elective pay, which says, those entities, even though they didn't pay taxes, they can get this credit back from the federal government. So that's huge. Suddenly, these things that didn't work for our schools or our local governments or our churches or synagogues now works for all of those institutions too. Okay, I'm going to go at this tax credit thing 2 ways. First, and you're going to get all of these slides, so this is just a chart of the kinds of tax credits. So electric vehicles, EV charging infrastructure, renewable energy efficiency, and then across the top, I did individuals, businesses, and nonprofits. And partly I put this into a chart because I'm going to say a lot of things about a lot of pieces, And it can get confusing because we'll just take one row and look at it. Let's look at the EVs, okay? Individuals qualify for tax credits on new and used electric vehicles, but the new vehicles have to meet certain manufacturing criteria to qualify for that credit. Okay, so there's a certain list of qualifying vehicles for the individual credit. And the individual credit you can actually claim at the dealership now. It's like super cool. Businesses, there is no list. All vehicles qualify, but it's only for new vehicles, not used. But for businesses, it also applies to things like electric forklifts and electric commercial lawnmowers. So it's a slightly, different set of things. And then for tax-exempt entities, everything that happens for businesses happens for them in this particular case. But so I include this kind of cheat sheet, and then we'll kind of talk through some of these because I think it's just helpful to go, oh yeah, the same rules do not apply everywhere. What our officials did with the Inflation Reduction Act, remember we all thought the Green New Deal was dead and there wasn't going to be anything, and then there was something. Well, they kind of cobbled a bunch of things together. And, maybe with the support of CCL and others, there's another Inflation Reduction Act Part 2 in the future that sort of fills in some of the holes that still exist in these programs. But because it's not perfect yet, but it's a whole lot better than what we had before. So let's talk specifics. And let's start with EVs. So again, for electric vehicles, individuals can get the credit for $7,500 for a new vehicle, $4,000 for a used vehicle. Those credits only happen through dealerships, but they can be instant at the dealership. And I don't know about other states, but I know in Wisconsin, a lot of dealerships are offering the instant. And that means you don't pay sales tax on the vehicle. Why wait a whole year to get that back on your taxes if you can get it off at the dealership? So that's become a really good thing there. And the used also have to be bought through a dealership. On the business and nonprofit side, there's also a higher incentive for large, like heavy-duty vehicles. We're not seeing a lot of activity there yet, but again, these are all in place through 2032, so there might be some more activity there. The other thing I should say here is charging infrastructure. So there is a tax credit that homeowners can get for installing charging infrastructure, and businesses qualify for a credit if you are installing it in a rural area or an area that is considered low income. And so there are maps that show where these areas are. So again, it gets a little bit more complicated. One of the things that's not complicated here is the renewable energy piece. When I look at the Inflation Reduction Act, I go, okay, the authors of this loved renewable energy, because it's kind of like Oprah. It's like you get a car and you get a car and everybody gets a solar panel. What they did with solar, so renewable energy in general, they said, okay, we're going to make it so that everyone qualifies. So there's the elective pay here. This can go on schools and faith communities and all of that. If you're a business and you don't have a tax liability, you can now legally, we call it transferring, but essentially sell your credit to someone who needs that credit. And people are getting like 95 cents on the dollar for those sales of renewable energy credits. So that's like significant if you don't have the profitability. And it works on homes. And one of the really cool things about the IRA is that the feds are encouraging us to layer things. So if you have a state or utility rebate, you can layer that with the tax credit. Now, they're never going to want you to get more money back than what you paid for a system, but there are cases where people are getting pretty much all of their money back because of the way the rebates stack together. On renewables, I like to share a case study because this is my favorite karmic story. So the village of McFarland is in Dane County. They have about 10,000 people. And before the IRA passed, kind of at the beginning of COVID, they were building a new public safety center, and they decided that would be a net zero energy facility. And then COVID happened and construction costs went up, and they had these really hard discussions about, were they gonna stay with their commitment to be net zero, or were they gonna go with something cheaper? Ultimately, their village board voted to remain on track with their commitment. They went back to voters and said, we're raising the levy because we're gonna do what we said we were gonna do. And then the Inflation Reduction Act passed. And so by the time they were done, they qualified. They have a solar array, they have a geothermal system. Together, those things cost about $3.4 million. They're gonna get $1 million back of elective pay. 30% of the full cost of the geothermal system, 30% of the solar system. So this little government of 10,000 people, one of these days here shortly, because we think the IRS literally has said the checks are in the mail, is gonna get this payment for $1 million. That is a payment that they could use to buy down these capital costs, that they could use for their next project. It's completely up to them. Tax credits are unrestricted funding back to an entity. So we're really wow, this is pretty exciting. And what I think is gonna happen in my communities is when McFarland gets that check, and we go out there and have a big party, and give them a big check to take a lot of photos with, it's gonna make a dozen other communities go, why aren't we getting a check? What are we doing on the building we're building to make sure we get a check? And that's how we make this change happen. This is what the IRA was intended to do. How do we lean into it so it does what it was intended to do? Okay, that was renewable energy. Energy efficiency, we'll start with the homeowner side of this. So the energy efficiency credits are 30%, just like the solar, the renewables, but they're capped. So it's up to 30% of the cost, but each of the things you might do are capped, and there's a cap every year of $1,200 that you can get as a credit for that year. So it's a little bit more complicated. It's not quite as lucrative as the renewable energy credits, but the way these are set up, it's a really good opportunity to start doing things maybe over a series of years. So again, these are in place through 2032. You could do a home energy audit this year, get 30% of that cost recovered. Then the auditor told you to do insulation or replace your furnace, maybe that's what you do next year, and you get 30% of that cost covered. And so over the course of a number of years, you start to make some good impact on what you're doing. One of the cool things about these federal credits is the IRS is starting to share with us who's using them. So we have this table that I kind of need to look at because my notes are really small. So what's here is the states that are in the Great Lakes region, the number of 1040 filings in that state, the number of filings that included either an energy efficiency or renewable energy credit, and the percent of that, and then the total credits claimed and the average credit amount. So I've got all of the states of the Midwest. You can find your state there. We're all in that 2 to 3% range. And then to give you some motivation, down here at the bottom, I included Hawaii. So solar, hugely popular in Hawaii. That's probably why their average tax credit is $6,000. That's solar. You've got the limits on what you can do on the energy efficiency side. To get that high, they're doing solar. But then the other one is Maine. So more than 3.5% of all of the tax filings in Maine included upgrades. And what's happening in Maine is there's this amazing transformation to heat pumps. Heat pumps are one of the things you can get the tax credit for. A link there to where this data is. I think there are opportunities for climate activists in every state to be looking at this data and going, hey, we should have a guest editorial about how we're not taking advantage of this and other states are taking advantage, which means those dollars are flowing somewhere else. Let's get on this kind of thing. So, cool data there. So that was the energy efficiency for individuals. On the business side, it's not a tax credit, it's a tax deduction. So the difference here, a tax credit comes off the amount of tax you owe. A tax deduction comes off your income before you calculate your amount of tax you owe. This tax deduction existed before the IRA, and they just made it better under the IRA. Again, Congress was trying to get things done fast. They were like, oh, we've got an efficiency deduction, we'll just make that better. The trouble is it's a deduction, and it's based on kind of the total building energy use intensity, essentially, how efficient or inefficient is the building. So if you have an older building that's big, maybe you've got a 100,000 square foot building or 200,000 square foot building, and it's really inefficient, this could be really lucrative because you could be looking at up to $5 a square foot of a deduction. But it doesn't really work very well for nonprofits because you have to transfer it to your design team, and it's complicated. We see a few cases where it's working, but really the IRA again did a better job, Congress did a better job here of accelerating the renewable energy than the energy efficiency. If we have another kick at this, we want this part to be more lucrative in the next part. Okay, and I keep talking about how tax credits are amazing and they're simple, but the trick about tax credits is they only flow to our communities if we do projects. So if nobody in Wisconsin does a project, then none of those tax credits flow to Wisconsin. There is no automatic allocation. It is, and I say this a lot when I am home, I say, it's entirely feasible that over the course of these 10 years, thousands of projects happen in California and on the East Coast, and if none of them happened in Wisconsin, it would still look like a success nationally. But we wouldn't get any of the money or benefits. And I say that to try to fire people up, that we need to get our share of the money and benefits. So one of the things we've done at the county level is we've created a whole section of our website where we lay out how these things work. We have a staff person who helps nonprofits and businesses make sense of things because we think it's really important that this happen. There are some states in the Midwest where there's some effort to provide some state support for that. But again, I think there's an opportunity everywhere in the Midwest to be thinking about that. How do we help people take advantage of these tax credits? And then just one more kind of visual to motivate you around that slide is a little bit hard to read up there, but so this is an RMI slide looking at how the status of different tax credits in the first year. So the first picture here is where the retail sales are happening associated with tax credits. And that's dominated by solar and heat pump data. So it tends to be the West Coast and the South where there was a lot of existing heat pump sales. Although you'll notice Maine up there is a lot of heat pumps in Maine. The second graph is clean manufacturing investments. And Michigan and Tennessee are getting a ton of the investments in clean manufacturing. That's electric battery facilities, EV cars, you see a lot of those. And then that final one is utility investments in utility scale renewables, and it's the dark blue is where like the wind projects are, because wind is a bigger investment. Again, I share these slides when I'm talking to like economic development folks, because I'm like, why is Wisconsin so hard to see on all these slides here? Why aren't those things happening in our industry? Who's thinking about this? Okay, so tax credits, really useful for business, useful for individuals when they have the wherewithal to pay for these projects. But sometimes individuals don't have the wherewithal. We had a little bit of a discussion of this earlier, you know, renters, low and moderate income households. There is one energy program, a national energy program through the IRA, and it's home energy rebates. So through this program, every state is getting an allocation for a home efficiency program and a home electrification program. Both of those programs are supposed to target low and moderate income households. And this is kind of, so really it's been about a year now that DOE has been issuing guidance to the states. Essentially how this works is DOE sets a bunch of rules, the states have to develop a plan, DOE has to approve their plan, and then they can implement their plan. And you can see there like what the states in the Great Lakes region, this is significant money that is gonna go hopefully to low and moderate income households in your communities. So let me give you a sense of where we are in Wisconsin on this, and so Wisconsin was the first state in the country to roll out the home efficiency part of the home energy rebates. And that's the homes piece, the efficiency piece, is about doing an audit on a home and doing measures that increase the efficiency of that home by at least 20%. And then there are, like, depending on how much the upgrade is, you get specific amounts of money for this. The aim is for households under 80% area median income, which is typically county median income, to get as much as 100% of those costs covered. So households that are likely have higher incomes than have been eligible for low-income weatherization programs in the past are going to be eligible for a really substantive thing here. And landlords are eligible for this too, for their households that qualify. Getting these dollars into the right hands is, I think, a real priority for all of us. So I can tell you at the county, we have a little bit of federal funding that we're actually using to work with community-based organizations to help households participate in these new programs. I should say the second program is an electrification program, installing heat pumps, induction stoves, all of that. Again, households below 80% area median income can get up to 100% of measures covered there. So the other thing I want to say before I close and open it up for questions is just, so those are the tax credits, those programs. Then, of course, under the IRA, there's a bunch of competitive grants, the stuff we're sort of used to seeing from the federal government. You know, there are opportunities for communities to get money for charging infrastructure, for rural communities to get solar and energy efficiency grants for farms and rural businesses kind of thing. There's a bunch of other things, and in every state, your state energy office at some level is coordinating these things. I would encourage you, if you can't see how they're coordinating it, it's a good thing to ask some questions there, because you could point to other states where you think the coordination is happening. I will admit that early in this, the state of Minnesota was very organized, and they were sending out newsletters, and probably I sent 4 or 5 of those to my colleagues at the state of Wisconsin going, look at this really helpful newsletter it's not from our state, to help motivate them to bring that along. The last thing I want to say about all of this is, so I've spent like 30 years in energy efficiency and climate action, and I've never seen this kind of opportunity. But what the feds did is they created an opportunity for us. They can't make local governments, schools, faith communities, neighborhood centers take advantage of these programs. It takes an army of us to make sure folks know about the opportunities when they do projects, to share what they've done so that other people feel a little bit of that sense, that fear of missing out, so they want to do something too. So that because we need to demonstrate how important this funding was so that there's more funding in our future. And with that, I'll open it up for questions. Here. Let's have that one.
Hi, I'm from Michigan, probably a northern suburb of Detroit. I've grappled with what's a good resource to use to figure out the IRA, other than you?
Well, I mean, I will say, everything that's on our website is not specific to Dane County. Like, use our website. Like,
okay.
What we've tried to do on our website is, the IRS guidelines for some of these tax credits run to 300 or 400 pages. We've read that. And then we went, okay, here are the 4 things people should really know. And here's the link to the guidelines, because some accountant or lawyer will want to read that eventually. But, so that's one thing. I think Rewiring America has some really good resources and calculators. Depending on what realm of things you're looking for, RMI is supporting the America is All In efforts. They've got some good resources. So those are maybe some places I'd start. Oh, and Lawyers for Good Government, who, especially when you're interested in the elective pay stuff, because they're lawyers, they did annotated versions of the IRS forms, which the rest of us, I think, were a little like, that seems like tax advice. I can't give tax advice, but and that's been really helpful for people to just see those sample forms filled out,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the group Work Money that CCL has been partnering with, and you can call Work Money, and you say, I want to buy a heat pump, and they'll talk you through how to get a heat pump and access these resources. You can find that on CCL Community. Bill? Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I was going to respond also to that. I also do presentations on the IRA, and I always point people to Rewiring America. Excellent site. For the homeowner, for those practical questions. And it even allows you to put in your income to see if you qualify for low or moderate income. So great site. I got a question for you though. I'm a landlord, home in Wauwatosa, and my renter is my brother-in-law, and he is definitely low income. I'm assuming even though my income might not qualify,
no, it's about the tenant's income. Yeah.
It's the
tenant income, right.
Okay.
So in Wisconsin, the efficiency program is rolled out. So you could reach out to, there's an IRA Wisconsin website where you could reach out to someone to do a home energy audit and figure out, okay, can you hit that 20% savings? Yeah. And then what does that look like? Yeah.
Cool. And then my other question is also when I do my presentations, I point out the state of Maine is dramatically getting these rebates for heat pumps. And it's a cold state, and yes, heat pumps work in cold states, so I point that out. And then I'm quizzically going, why so many in Maine? And I find out that they're mostly
Fuel oil.
on homes that are fueled by oil, which is a very expensive way to heat your house. So they're converting to heat pumps. My question is there maps of like Wisconsin when I talk, because the same situation would apply to rural Wisconsin, I imagine, where there's not infrastructure, i.e. methane pipelines, natural gas pipelines. Those areas would be highly incentivized to switch over to heat pumps. Where can I find a map like that so I can flip it up?
So the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin has a map of the gas service utilities. I'm pausing because I think places that have, in some cases, you might have people who have propane who are now in somebody's territory, but there's not a pipe running. You know, it's not going to be a perfect map because utilities have tried to expand those territories. But like that map will show you areas where there is no natural gas service. Yeah, and we think that's going to be a great opportunity in Wisconsin. Yes, that's part of the story in Maine is that they're heating with expensive fuel oil, but they're proving that heat pumps work in cold climates because it's also cold there.
So I have a two-parter question that comes from conversations I've had with people at tabling events. And if anyone else chimes in, because I know you're in Wisconsin. But as far as you know, all 50 states are participating in this, right? So if someone from Kentucky tells me that they don't qualify for IRA tax credits, do you know if there's any truth to that?
No. So, and I should have said, that's another beauty of tax credits is this is a federal tax credit.
Okay.
Your legislature can do nothing to stop you from getting a federal tax credit on your federal filing. So that, the tax credits everyone can get. The home energy rebate programs, every state has to submit a plan. And a few states have made noises that they're not going to take this money.
Maybe that's what they were thinking of.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think the last I heard, most of those states were coming around because, like, there are other powers that want to see some of this money happen in communities. And it's just, you know, saying, no, we don't need $200 million to help people pay their energy bills just doesn't make a very good headline. It's like, okay, maybe we have to do that.
So do you know, were all states eligible in 2024, or did some are a little slow in implementing this and you can't really
So
claim it
what
till next year?
happens is everybody has until, I feel like 26 is maybe the deadline to do their plan. So there probably are states who are slow walking this at this point.
Okay.
Which is, you know, so there might not be, but the DOE on their home energy rebate page has a couple of maps that show what states have what available. So that would be a useful thing if you're tabling and you've got people from multiple states to know, like, yeah.
With the tax credits and the rebates, it's one or the other, correct?
Yes.
You can't take both a tax credit and
Well,
get
wait,
a rebate.
my friend over there is shaking. So there are going to be situations where you can definitely take a utility rebate and a tax credit, but you could also take so maybe you're a household that is in the higher income bracket that still qualifies for some of the home energy rebate funds, and you have a tax credit. As long as that doesn't add up to more than the cost of the item, you can stack them. The feds are really into stacking, and the example they provide on this is about school buses. So they're giving away, they're giving grants competitive grants to schools of up to a couple $100,000 to buy a school bus. But that school can still get that elective pay 30% credit on that same bus again. So now maybe they're paying, just a little bit for that technology. So one of the complications in this is the standards for some of the new home energy rebates and the tax credits are not identical. So you want to make sure you get equipment that qualifies for both things. And you know, I think some of that is growing pains. It's the first couple of years of this. It will be better in 2 more years because they'll have worked out, oh, we're all going to use the same standards. But right now, it's a little messy, and contractors complain that, well, they asked me about the tax credit, but now they're saying this other thing, and it doesn't qualify for both, kind of thing.
Let me give you a
Yeah.
hypothetical. So let's say that I'm a moderate income in a very wealthy area. So maybe I have some taxes that I'm going to owe, but I want to buy a heat pump, and I want some rebate money,
Right.
but I'm not taking a tax credit on the same heat pump, am I?
You could if you still had a payment you were making on the heat pump. So if the home energy rebate only covers, like, let's say half the cost of your heat pump, then you could still get a tax credit essentially on the other half.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
The way I understand it is, for moderate income, the IRA will, once this implements in December in Wisconsin, you would get a $4,000 point of sale rebate on that heat pump as a moderate income. Say you're also paying a lot of taxes, you can also claim up to $1,200, 30% of the total cost of the heat pump. Up to $1,200. So in effect, you can get a $1,200 tax credit off your tax.
Provided that doesn't add up to more than you paid, is sort of yeah, right.
Okay, I'm from Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, and I'm wondering if you know of any competitive grants for like nonprofits or universities specifically.
So, maybe the one here that the Environmental Protection Agency has a bunch of stuff in sort of the environmental justice framework that it's all communities and groups should partner and do something. Community change is one of those opportunities. There have been a couple. That would be an area to look at specifically. And in terms of the competitive grants, if you Google, I won't think of who maintains these sites off the top of my head, but IRA competitive grants, there are several national organizations that track grant opportunities, and you can typically search by, we're a university, we're interested in doing this kind of thing, and get to something. Yeah. I also, because you're in Wisconsin, encourage you to reach out to the Office of Energy Innovation at the PSC. It's totally legit to go, hey, we're trying to figure out what in here help us do that, because they should be doing that for you.
What's the best way to find out where our state is on?
Yeah, so it's always your state energy office that is leading these things. So it's where is your state energy office? State energy offices are all different around. Essentially, to get a variety of federal dollars, states set up a state energy office, but where it is really different state to state. So that's going to be the conduit for most of these, any of the things that are allocated, and they're getting a bunch of communications. On the federal side, you can go to about any of these things, like REAP grants. If you go to the USDA REAP grants page, it will show you what grants are happening in what states. And, and similarly for other things, the feds are doing a pretty good job of trying to be transparent and let people know where activity is happening. So that can help you have an entry in your state to go, hey, we have a lot of agriculture and I don't understand. Like, we're not getting very many of these grant dollars. Is there something we could be doing to help you make that happen? It's that this is an opportunity. Why aren't we leaning into it?
I have a question that might be a dumb question.
No
but
dumb questions.
Are we as CCL chapters, is something we could do is to reach out to whatever our individual town or city is, and are they eligible for all of these same things?
They are tax exempt. And depending on where you are, so this all came out in 2022. I can tell you for the first 7-8 months of me talking about the IRA, I would say to a local government or school district, and now, thanks to the IRA, we can access these funds. And they'd go, oh, Kathy, we're tax exempt. That doesn't work for, there's a layer of disbelief. This is upending how we've done this forever. So yeah, it's really important that I think your school districts, your local governments, your nonprofits, if you're not, so in my universe, there are lots of those groups looking at solar, they're looking at geothermal for new buildings because when you take 30% of a geothermal system, and the thing here is, so this is ground source heat pumps. That's not just the bores in the ground, but in a new building, geothermal includes all the controls, all the ductwork, everything inside the facility. You take 30% off that cost, it's pretty close to the cost of an inefficient HVAC system. And you're getting a much more efficient system. We just had a Holy Wisdom Monastery did this retrofit, and their numbers were that the retrofitting geothermal was cheaper than replacing their boiler. Well, what's the no-brainer here now? One more?
We have time for one more.
Yeah, I was beating my head for months after that came out. It was so exciting, the possibilities. And I couldn't find that information about states. Finally, yes, go to your state energy department because they're managing the distribution of the allocations that they get out of the IRA. But in relation to what you were saying, Rewiring America, plugging that site immensely, they have, in addition to their homeowners calculator, and I will say too, on that score, the calculator, they are asking states to enter their state decisions in the calculator, and I think on Michigan one's the only one I've looked at for myself. Now, you might be eligible for such and such a rebate, but it's not out yet.
Right.
So that's more than they were able to say initially. But they also, on Rewiring America, have how to move your city government, how to move your school district, a whole laid out game plan there. So it's really, that's a great starting place.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm just thinking I'll kind of volunteer this. John, I can coordinate with maybe you and Elizabeth to, we could create a list of the links to the state energy offices, because some of they're not called, ours is called the Office of Energy Innovation, okay? That, you might not have guessed that was the state energy office if you weren't kind of inside Wisconsin politics for decades to learn why it's called that sort of thing. So let's plan to just create that list for folks, because that would be a good appendix here. Thank you all. This was fun. Great questions.
Thank you, Kathy.